Some hotel rooms have stories. This one has warnings. They don't advertise room 13A. It isn't on the floor plan. The receptionist swears it doesn't exist, and yet, guests keep checking in. Their names never appear in the ledger. Their luggage never leaves. And sometimes, late at night, if you stand in the hallway outside room 12, you can hear it. The faint click of a key turning in a lock that shouldn't be there. No one talks about room 13A. But Thomas Hale wasn't here to stay the night. He was here to prove it existed. The Lexington Grand had been beautiful once. When it opened in 1926, it was one of the tallest hotels in the city. Crystal chandeliers, marble columns, Art Deco furniture, the kind of place the elite stayed when they wanted to be seen. But that was a lifetime ago. Now it was a relic. The chandeliers were dim with decades of dust. The wallpaper peeled in long, curling strips like dead skin. Even the air smelled tired, a blend of mold, old carpet, and something faintly metallic that clung to the back of Thomas's throat. He paused in the lobby, taking it all in. No one was here. No bellhop. No other guests. Just a single receptionist behind an antique desk, her eyes glued to a ledger that looked as old as the hotel itself. "Checking in?" she asked without looking up. "Not exactly." Thomas cleared his throat. "I'm investigating. I called earlier." That made her look at him. Her face was pale, drawn tight over sharp cheekbones. Her name tag read Margaret. "You're the journalist," she said flatly. "Investigator," Thomas corrected, though it wasn't untrue. He'd written for papers before, dug up stories no one wanted told. But this wasn't about a byline. This was personal. Margaret's eyes narrowed. "I told you on the phone. There's no room 13A. Thomas set his bag down, pulling out a printed blueprint, an old copy of the Lexington's floor plan from the 1950s. "Then how do you explain this?" He pointed to the faint square between rooms 12 and 14. A room labeled 13A. Margaret's lips pressed into a thin line. Blueprints get revised. Rooms are combined. Things change. But the hallway's dimensions don't. And on the 13th floor, there's a gap, the space where 13A should be. It doesn't make sense. She didn't reply. Thomas leaned in. People have seen it. People have stayed there. Margaret's expression didn't change, but something flickered in her eyes. Fear. "No one stays there," she said finally. "You should leave." Thomas studied her for a moment, then smiled faintly. "Then you won't mind if I take a look around." Margaret's gaze dropped back to her ledger. "Do what you want. But I can't help you." Thomas grabbed his bag, heading for the elevator. As the doors creaked shut, Margaret called after him. "Don't try to open the door. Whatever you hear, don't try." The elevator groaned as it climbed, its panel missing several buttons. Thomas had to press the 13 button 3 times before it stayed lit. The doors opened onto a long, narrow hallway. The carpet was threadbare, the once vibrant pattern faded to a dull smear of color. The lights flickered, casting long, stuttering shadows along the walls. Thomas counted the room numbers as he walked. 10, 11, 12, then 14. He stopped. Number 13. No 13A. Just a stretch of blank wall between 12 and 14. Thomas paced it, measuring with slow, deliberate steps. The wall was wider than it should be, deep enough to hide a room. He pressed his palm against the wallpaper. It felt wrong, colder than the rest of the hallway. He knocked. Hollow. His pulse quickened. There was a room here. And then, faintly, he heard it. A sound from behind the wall. The unmistakable click of a lock turning. Thomas froze, his hand still resting on the cold wallpaper. That sound hadn't been his imagination. He knew the click of a lock, deliberate, metallic, sharp. Someone had turned it from the inside. He pressed his ear against the wall. Silence. Then, faintly, a low hum, like the buzz of an old refrigerator or distant electrical wiring. But rhythmic, almost breathing. Thomas backed away, pulse hammering. He pulled his phone from his pocket, forgetting it had been dead since he arrived. Still no sign of life. He stuffed it back into his jacket, cursing under his breath. There was no denying it anymore. There was a room here. The door appeared 10 minutes later. Thomas had been pacing the hallway, running his fingers along the wall, when his hand suddenly hit something smooth. He blinked. There it was. A door. Old, dark wood. A tarnished brass knob. No number plate. It hadn't been there a moment ago. Thomas stumbled back, heart hammering. He blinked hard, rubbed his eyes. But the door stayed. Room 13A. He couldn't explain how he knew. But he knew. Thomas gripped the knob. It was ice cold. He twisted. Locked. He should have stopped. Margaret's warning echoed in his head. Don't try to open the door. Whatever you hear, don't try. But Thomas Hale wasn't the type to listen to warnings. He pulled a lockpick set from his bag, an old habit from his days chasing stories people didn't want told. He knelt, sliding the pick into the keyhole. The lock was strange. Too deep, too intricate. Then, click. The door eased open on its own. A blast of cold air hit him, sharp and unnatural. Inside was darkness, not the kind that came from a room with no lights. This felt alive, heavy, like the darkness itself didn't want him here. Thomas fumbled for his flashlight and clicked it on. The beam cut through the black, revealing a hotel room. At first glance, it looked ordinary. A bed with stiff, white sheets. A dresser with a mirror. A single chair by the window. But everything was wrong. The furniture was too old, too pristine, like it hadn't aged a day since 1926. The bed was made perfectly, but there was an impression in the pillow, as though someone had been lying there. Thomas's flashlight quivered in his grip. He forced himself inside, the door creaking shut behind him. The air felt dense, humming faintly. On the nightstand sat a guest book. Thomas flipped it open. Pages of names. No dates. No check-in or check-out times. Just names, written in neat, flowing cursive. Dozens of them. He flipped further back. Hundreds. Some had been crossed out in thick, angry lines. His skin crawled. He turned to the last page. A fresh name had been written there. Thomas Hale. His breath hitched. He hadn't written that. A sound made him spin. The chair by the window. It was facing the bed before. Now it faced him. Empty. Waiting. Thomas's knees went weak. His flight instinct screamed, but his feet wouldn't move. Then, faintly, the hum grew louder. It wasn't electricity. It wasn't breathing. It was voices. Hundreds of them, whispering just beneath the edge of hearing. Thomas backed toward the door, fumbling for the knob. But it was gone. The wall behind him was smooth. Seamless. The door had vanished. Thomas's breath came in shallow bursts, his back pressed against the cold wall where the door used to be. He turned in a slow circle, the beam of his flashlight shaking across the room. No exit. No seams. No hint of a way out. Just him and the room. And the guest book. He approached it again, his legs stiff like they belonged to someone else. The page still bore his name. Perfect cursive, ink glistening like it had just been written. Thomas Hale. His throat tightened. This wasn't possible. He hadn't signed anything. He flipped back through the pages again, scanning the other names. Daniel Cross. Victoria Lamb. Gerald Wilkes. Some were smudged as if someone had tried to erase them. Others were crossed out violently, the paper torn where the ink had dug too deep. He noticed something else. The handwriting wasn't identical, but it was similar. All of it. Like the same hand had been guiding them. Thomas shut the book, his heart drumming against his ribs. All right, he muttered, trying to keep his voice steady. This is a trick. Just a trick. He turned to the dresser. Its mirror reflected the room perfectly. The bed, the chair, the nightstand. But not him. Thomas stared at the empty space where his reflection should have been. Then, slowly, a shape emerged. It wasn't him. It was someone else. A tall, thin man in an old-fashioned bellhop uniform, skin gray and stretched tight over his bones. His face was featureless, like clay smoothed over. The figure tilted its head slowly, unnaturally, as if studying Thomas. Thomas stumbled back, flashlight clattering to the floor. When he looked up, the mirror was empty. The hum of voices swelled, filling the air like static. Thomas grabbed his flashlight and aimed it toward the chair. Someone was sitting in it. He couldn't see them clearly, just the outline of a figure, blacker than the surrounding darkness, its shape barely human. The whispers grew louder, words forming. Check in, stay, stay. The shadow rose from the chair, towering over him. Thomas bolted to the wall, pounding his fists against it. Let me out, he screamed. The wall didn't budge. The shadow moved closer. Thomas turned and did the only thing he could think of. He ran to the guest book. Flipping to his name, he clawed at the page, trying to tear it out. The paper wouldn't rip. It was stronger than parchment, almost leathery. The voices rose in a deafening chorus. Stay, stay. You are ours. Thomas screamed and hurled the book across the room. It hit the wall with a thud, landing open on the floor. He stared. His name had been crossed out. The room went silent. Utterly silent. Thomas's breath echoed loud in the stillness. The shadow by the chair was gone. Relief washed over him for a split second, until he noticed the dresser mirror again. It showed the bed, and someone was lying in it. Someone who looked exactly like him. Thomas stumbled back, his mind screaming. That's when the wall behind him shifted. The door was back, but it wasn't closed. It was wide open, leading into a hallway that wasn't the one he came from. He didn't care. He ran. He bolted through the door, down the new hallway, never looking back. The corridor twisted, turned, narrowed, until he couldn't tell which direction he was heading. The lights flickered, buzzing. And then, abruptly, he stopped. The hallway ended at a single door, identical to the one he'd just left. No number, no handle, just waiting. Thomas collapsed against the wall, shaking. No matter where he went, he couldn't leave room 13A. Thomas sat slumped against the wall, chest heaving, his clothes damp with sweat. The hallway around him felt wrong, narrower, ceiling lower, as if the space itself were closing in. He forced himself to his feet, legs trembling, and faced the door at the corridor's end. No knob, no keyhole, just smooth, ancient wood that pulsed faintly under his palm like living skin. The voices returned, low and coaxing. Stay, you belong here, like them. Thomas ripped his hand away. Like who? He snapped, his voice raw. Who? The door opened on its own. Thomas stepped inside before he could stop himself. This room was bigger than the last. The walls were lined with shelves, but they weren't filled with books. They were filled with objects. Personal things. A man's wristwatch. A child's shoe. A cracked pair of glasses. Dozens, no, hundreds, of belongings, each meticulously placed and labeled with a name. Thomas's stomach turned. These weren't decorations. They were remains. Trophies. At the center of the room stood a single table. Upon it lay an open guest book, older than the one he'd seen before. Its pages were brittle, the ink faded with time. Thomas flipped through it. Names filled every page. At the end of each, a date. He skimmed them. 1927, 1932, 1948, 1961. The last entry had no date. Margaret Hale. Thomas froze. The name twisted in his mind. Margaret. The receptionist. Footsteps echoed behind him. Slow. Heavy. He spun, expecting to see the shadow. Instead, Margaret stood in the doorway. Except it wasn't her. Her skin sagged, gray and lifeless. Her once bright eyes clouded like old glass. Her mouth moved, but her voice came from somewhere deeper. You shouldn't have checked in, Mr. Hale. Thomas stumbled back. What is this place? Margaret, or the thing wearing her, smiled thinly. The Lexington has always been selective about its guests. She glided toward him, feet not touching the floor. Thomas's back hit the shelves, knocking over a box. Photographs spilled out. Dozens of black and white portraits, all of them showing guests in room 13A. Men, women, children, every single one staring straight at the camera with the same blank, lifeless expression. Margaret leaned close. They came to see the room, to prove it existed, to leave with their stories. Her face twitched. They all stayed. Thomas bolted, shoving past her. He didn't know where he was going. He didn't care. Hallways twisted into each other, stairs leading nowhere. The Lexington was alive, shifting, rearranging. Every door he tried led back to the same hallway. Every hallway ended at the same place. Room 13A. Exhausted, Thomas collapsed in front of it. The voices were no longer whispers. They were singing. A single phrase, over and over. Check and stay forever. The door creaked open. Thomas's name glowed faintly inside the guest book, waiting to be crossed out. Thomas crawled toward the open door. His body felt heavy, like the hotel's air was pulling him down, dragging him inch by inch into its gut. The room was waiting. Pristine sheets. The silent chair by the window. The mirror. The nightstand with the guest book. All of it exactly as before. Except this time, Thomas didn't hesitate. He staggered inside. The door shut behind him with a quiet, final click. The guest book lay open on the bed. His name glowed faintly on the last page, still untouched by ink. Thomas stared at it, chest heaving. Why me? He whispered, his voice cracking. Why any of us? The mirror answered. He saw himself, but not as he was. Not alive. His skin was pale and waxy. His eyes sunken, lifeless. His jaw slack like a corpse on display. And behind him, rows of figures filled the room. Men, women, children. All the names from the book. They stood shoulder to shoulder, their faces empty. Waiting. Thomas turned to run, but the figures moved as one, blocking his path. Margaret's voice filled the room. "You don't understand, Mr. Hale." The mirror flickered. In its reflection, room 13A wasn't a room. It was endless. A black void dotted with hundreds of doors, each one numbered, each one waiting. "You didn't find room 13A, Margaret said softly. "It found you." The figures closed in. Thomas screamed, thrashing, but their grip was cold, unyielding. They dragged him toward the bed. His back hit the mattress, the sheets stiff and suffocating. The guest book slid from the nightstand, falling open across his chest. The pen moved on its own. A single, clean line crossed through his name. And just like that, Thomas Hale was gone. 3 days later, the Lexington Grand had a new receptionist. A pale man with sharp cheekbones and tired, glassy eyes. The name tag on his chest read, Thomas. The Lexington still stands. The blueprints still don't list room 13A. But if you know where to look, if you stay late enough, you might find the door. And if you do, you'll check in. But you won't check out.